Was a K-pop idol truly allowed to enter Chanel's most closed-off space? Or is the world merely witnessing an elegant illusion designed too perfectly to be taken at face value? This question exploded across the global public consciousness the moment photos of Jungkook of BTS emerged from the Chanel Fragrance Laboratory, a space that for decades has been known as the heart of the creation of the most sacred scents in the history of the fashion world. A place that for many A-list celebrities has remained nothing more than a myth, rather than a destination that can be touched. Yet there sat Jungkook, calm, almost too calm, holding a fragrance testing strip, surrounded by bottles of perfume that are not merely scented liquids, but archives of French aesthetic civilization. The photos were first released to the public through Elle Korea's official Instagram, and from the very first second of their appearance, they were not treated like an ordinary editorial post. There was something that felt different, almost unsettling, as if the public was not simply seeing a global star on a work visit, but witnessing a far greater symbolic shift. Jungkook, the youngest member of BTS long known as the Golden Magne, now stood, or more precisely sat, at the creative center of Chanel alongside Olivier Polge, a legendary figure dubbed the Nose by the perfume industry, a creator of scents who holds some of the most closely guarded secrets in the world of luxury. Questions began to surface, not only from fans, but also from fashion observers, pop culture academics, and global creative industry players. Why Jungkook? Why now? And most striking of all, is this truly just a photo shoot? Or is it a subtle signal that Chanel is rewriting the definition of who is worthy of entering its creative spaces? The Chanel Fragrance Laboratory is not merely a work studio. In the history of this fashion house, the perfume laboratory is a territory treated almost like a sacred space. It is where the formula of Chanel No. 5 is preserved, reinterpreted, and safeguarded across generations. It is where Chanel's abstract aesthetics are born, not in visual form, but in scents that are invisible yet capable of triggering memory, power, and identity. That Jungkook was allowed to enter, be photographed, and positioned as part of the creative narrative of this space is an anomaly that cannot be explained solely by the label Global Ambassador. Elle Korea, through a caption that appears simple yet is laden with meaning, wrote that as a global ambassador for Chanel Beauty, Jungkook could not possibly miss the heart of Chanel's fragrance creation. At a glance, this sentence sounds natural. However, when examined semiotically, it contains far deeper clues. The word heart is not a casual metaphor. It implies the center of life, the source of the pulse, the place where true identity is born. By placing Jungkook there, the narrative constructed is no longer about promotion, but about symbolic participation. Furthermore, the caption explicitly draws a parallel between the identity of Chanel fragrances and Jungkook's own identity. Quoting a previous interview with Olivier Polge, Elle Korea wrote that the identity of Chanel fragrances is complex and abstract, not limited to a single ingredient, but driven by a desire to transform the aesthetics of each individual element. Then, without hesitation, the narrative is directly transferred to Jungkook. Jungkook's identity is described as complex and abstract, not bound to a single element, and carrying a drive to transform the aesthetics of every component that makes him who he is. At this point, the public began to ask, is Chanel speaking about Jungkook as an individual, or as a concept? Jungkook's transformation from idol to global aesthetic symbol was not an instant process. For years, he has been framed as a versatile performer, a vocalist with stable technique, a dancer with high precision, and a public figure with cross-cultural appeal. However, what happened at the Chanel Fragrance Laboratory feels like a narrative leap that transcends all of that. He is no longer merely a campaign face or a style icon. He is positioned as a living metaphor for Chanel's own philosophy. And here is where the true surprise emerges. Chanel is not borrowing Jungkook's popularity, but integrating his identity into its creative language. The released photos reinforce this impression in an extremely subtle way. There are no exaggerated poses, no dramatization typical of conventional fashion editorials. Jungkook is seen sitting at a work table, surrounded by perfume bottles, with natural city light entering through the window. His hand holds a fragrance testing strip, a simple tool that in the world of perfume serves as the first medium between concept and the reality of scent. A close-up of Jungkook's hand holding a strip labeled Santal de Mer sparked new speculation. Is this merely a sample or a clue? Does the name carry a special meaning? Or is it simply an artistic coincidence? In another photo, Olivier Polge is seen smiling while holding a similar strip. That smile, which to some may appear ordinary, is read differently by observers. There is no rigid hierarchical distance, no body language that signals a purely formal relationship. What is visible are two creative figures sharing space, time, and possibility. In the world of luxury, which fiercely guards structure and boundaries, visuals like this rarely occur without strategic intent. It did not take long for the public to react. On Platform X, posts from fan accounts such as @JJ_time spread rapidly, accompanied by titles that framed the moment as a significant event. Reactions from ARMY around the world erupted across a wide emotional spectrum, from euphoria to hopeful suspicion. Some wondered whether there would be a behind-the-scenes video, recalling that Chanel had previously released similar content with figures such as Timothée Chalamet. Others went further, calling Jungkook the Chanel Prince, a title that implicitly places him not only as a partner, but as a symbolic heir. In Indonesia, the emotional response was particularly intense. Social media was flooded with analyses, caption translations, and lengthy discussions about the meaning of the visit. Hashtags such as #Jungkook and #LilyCoverStar became markers that the public did not view this as a trivial event. There was a sense that something was being prepared, something not yet announced, but whose clues had been laid out with remarkable precision. Yet the biggest question still hangs in the air. If this was merely a photo shoot, why did it have to take place in a laboratory? If it was just an editorial, why was the narrative so philosophical? And if it was simply a campaign, why did Chanel choose to blur the boundaries between brand identity and Jungkook's identity so thoroughly? At this point, it is clear that what is visible is only the surface. Beneath the calm aesthetics and poetic captions lie dynamics of power, brand strategy, and a redefinition of an idol's role within the global luxury ecosystem. Jungkook did not merely enter Chanel's laboratory. He was placed there with full symbolic awareness. And when a fashion house as powerful as Chanel opens the doors to its most private space, the world has reason to ask, not about what has already happened, but about what will happen next. If the Chanel Fragrance Laboratory were merely an ordinary workplace, there would be no global uproar like the one unfolding now. In reality, however, Chanel's perfume laboratory is not a neutral space. It is a symbol. In the long history of this fashion house, the laboratory is not simply a place where scents are blended, but a center for the production of meaning, a space where abstract ideas are translated into identities that can be felt, remembered, and passed down across generations. Therefore, the decision to photograph Jungkook there cannot be separated from a symbolic message far more complex than that of a conventional fashion campaign. In the world of luxury, location is language, and Chanel is exceptionally fluent in using that language. When an ambassador is photographed on a runway, the conversation is about fashion. When photographed in a haute couture atelier, it speaks of craftsmanship. But when someone is photographed in a perfume laboratory, the message conveyed is no longer about appearance, but about essence, about something invisible, yet decisive. It is here that Jungkook's position becomes both intriguing and unsettling. He is not framed merely as a visual object, but as a subject interacting with the deepest core of the brand. The photographs released by Elle Korea reinforce this narrative through an almost clinical sense of calm. There are no exaggerated expressions, no dramatization commonly found in celebrity editorials. Jungkook sits at a work table filled with perfume bottles, like someone learning, observing, and contemplating. The city light behind him does not dominate, as if the outside world has been deliberately muted, so that focus remains on the internal process taking place. This is not glamorous aesthetics. This is contemplative aesthetics. Then a follow-up question emerges, increasingly difficult to ignore. Why did Chanel choose Jungkook for such an intimate narrative, while many other global ambassadors are placed merely as campaign faces? The simplest answer would be popularity. Yet that answer collapses when confronted with the fact that Chanel is not a brand lacking in popular figures. They are extremely selective about who is allowed to touch their core narrative. Thus, another possibility opens up. That Jungkook is viewed not merely as a famous figure, but as a representation of values aligned with Chanel's current creative philosophy. Elle Korea's caption equating Jungkook's identity with the identity of Chanel's perfumes becomes a key point of interpretation that cannot be ignored. In cultural and branding studies, such explicit identity alignment is rarely done unless a brand seeks to build a long-term association that goes beyond seasonal campaigns. When Chanel states that Jungkook's identity is complex and abstract, and not limited to a single element, they are adopting conceptual language typically reserved for their own iconic products. This is not ordinary praise. It is the placement of Jungkook within Chanel's conceptual framework. Olivier Polge, as Chanel's in-house perfumer, is not an incidental figure in this narrative. He is both guardian of heritage and innovator, responsible for ensuring that every Chanel fragrance remains faithful to the brand's DNA while staying relevant to its time. That Polge appears in the same frame as Jungkook, smiling while holding a fragrance testing strip, is a visual rich with meaning. This is neither an explicit mentor-student relationship nor a cold brand ambassador dynamic. What is presented is a creative dialogue, or at least the illusion of one, carefully designed. The close-up of Jungkook's hand holding a strip labeled Santal de Mer becomes a small detail that sparks major speculation. In the editorial world, such details rarely appear without intention. The name, even if it may simply be an internal label, is read by the public as a clue, a code that might refer to a specific scent concept or even a project yet to be announced. Is this merely part of visual storytelling, or an early signal of something more concrete? Chanel offers no clarification, and it is precisely in this silence that speculation flourishes. The public reaction that erupted across social media shows that this narrative has successfully touched a deep emotional layer. ARMY did not merely celebrate Jungkook's presence at Chanel, but dissected every visual and textual element with near-academic precision. They questioned, guessed, and constructed theories. This phenomenon illustrates how modern fandoms are no longer passive, but active participants in the production of meaning. Chanel, known for its acute awareness of cultural dynamics, seems to fully understand this potential. Interestingly, Elle Korea provides no overly explicit additional context. There is no lengthy explanation of the visit's agenda, no official statement regarding a follow-up project. This informational void functions instead as a wide space for interpretation, fueling public curiosity. In modern communication strategy, this is an effective technique, offering just enough information to spark discussion, while withholding details to maintain narrative tension. To this point, Jungkook's exploration of the Chanel laboratory can no longer be viewed as a single event. It becomes part of a larger narrative about how the luxury industry perceives global pop figures in a new era. Jungkook, with his highly structured and disciplined K-pop background, is now moving within a space that demands abstraction, reflection, and creative silence. This shift does not only change how the public views Jungkook, but also how the public views Chanel. To this point, it is difficult to ignore one fact that keeps resurfacing in the public mind. Chanel has said nothing officially, yet the world is already reacting as if a major announcement is only a matter of time. This silence is precisely what makes the most noise. In the luxury industry, silence does not mean emptiness. Silence is strategy. And when Jungkook is shown inside the Chanel fragrance laboratory without detailed explanation, that silence transforms into the strongest clue that something is being designed behind the scenes. Speculation, then, does not grow without reason. Chanel's history shows that whenever the brand grants visual access to its internal creative spaces, a subsequent phase almost always follows, whether in the form of a short film, a special edition, or a multi-layered editorial narrative. The public remembers how Chanel builds mythology around process, not just outcome. So when Jungkook is framed as part of that process, an unavoidable question emerges. Is he merely observing, or is he influencing? Fan emotions quickly shift from euphoria to a mix of protectiveness and curiosity. In Indonesia, this response feels especially intense. Jungkook is no longer seen simply as a global idol, but as a representation of cultural pride, someone who has successfully entered the most exclusive spaces of Western luxury. For many, what happens inside the Chanel laboratory is not just Jungkook's personal achievement, but a symbol of a shifting balance of cultural power, where Asian figures no longer stand at the margins of luxury narratives, but at their center. Yet this is precisely where emotional tension arises. The closer Jungkook appears to the core of Chanel, the greater the public expectation, and the higher the risk of disappointment if all of this turns out to be only an editorial. Chanel seems acutely aware of this dynamic and chooses to let the public wrestle with their own interpretations. There is no denial, no confirmation, only images, poetic captions, and empty spaces filled by imagination. What is particularly striking is that the language used by El Korea never places Jungkook in a passive role. He is not described as a guest, but as someone who is exploring the world of Chanel fragrance. The word exploring implies agency, curiosity, and active engagement. This is diction rarely used casually in fashion journalism. It invites readers to imagine Jungkook not as an object on display, but as a subject who is absorbing, understanding, and perhaps internalizing the philosophy of scent. Here is where the most subtle emotional surprise takes effect. The public is not only made to admire, but also to empathize. Many imagine Jungkook, an artist who grew up under intense scrutiny from a young age, now standing in a quiet room filled with aroma, where time moves more slowly and creativity is born from silence. This imagination builds an emotional closeness that ordinary glamorous campaigns cannot achieve. Will all of this lead to a perfume launch? Will there be a behind-the-scenes video as fans hope? Or perhaps something more abstract? A redefinition of what it means to be an ambassador in a new era? So far, Chanel has chosen not to answer. But perhaps that is the answer itself. In a world driven by speed and instant announcements, Chanel and Jungkook seem to prefer letting the scent of this story spread slowly, leaving behind questions more powerful than any statement. What is certain is that after this visit, it is difficult to see Jungkook and Chanel in the same way as before. Something has shifted, and the public, whether consciously or not, has been invited into a laboratory of meaning, where identity, aesthetics, and cultural power are being reformulated.